Princess Louise, Duchess of Argyll, VA, C, GCVO, GBE, RRC, GCStJ, Louisa Caroline Alberta. Born on the 18th of March 1848 and died on the 3rd of December 1939, was the sixth child and fourth daughter of Queen Victoria and Prince Albert. In her public life, she was a strong proponent of the arts and higher education and of the feminist cause. Her early life was spent moving among the various royal residences in the company of her family. When her father died in December 1861, the court went into a long period of mourning, to which with time Louise became unsympathetic. She was an able sculptor and artist, and several of her sculptures remain today. She was also a supporter of the feminist movement, corresponding with Josephine Butler, and visiting Elizabeth Garrett. Before her marriage, Louise served as an unofficial secretary to the Queen from 1866 to 1871. The question of Louise's marriage was discussed in the late 1860s. Suitors from the royal houses of Prussia and Denmark were suggested, but Victoria did not want her to marry a foreign prince, and therefore suggested a high-ranking member of the British aristocracy. Despite opposition from members of the royal family, Louise fell in love with John Campbell, Marquess of Lorne, the heir of the Duke of Argyll. Victoria consented to the marriage, which took place on March 21, 1871. After a happy beginning, the two drifted apart, possibly because of their childlessness and the Queen's constraints on their activities. In 1878, Lorne was appointed Governor-General of Canada, a post he held 1878 to 1884. Louise was viceregal consort, starting a lasting interest in Canada. Her names were used to name many features in Canada, including Lake Louise and the province of Alberta. Following her mother's death in 1901, she entered the social circle established by her elder brother, the new king, Edward VII. Louise's marriage with Lorne survived thanks to long periods of separation. They reconciled in 1911, and Louise was devastated by Lorne's death in 1914. After the First World War she began to retire from public life, undertaking few public duties outside Kensington Palace, where she died at the age of 91. Louise was determined to be seen as an ordinary person and not as a member of the court. When traveling abroad, she often used the alias Mrs. Campbell. Louise was known for her charity towards servants. On one occasion, the butler approached her and requested permission to dismiss the second footman, who was late getting out of bed. When she advised that the footman be given an alarm clock, the butler informed her that he already had one. She then went so far as to suggest a bed that would throw him out at a specified time, but she was told this was not feasible. Finally, she suggested that he might be ill, and when checked, he was found to have tuberculosis. The footman was therefore sent to New Zealand to recover. On another occasion, when she visited Bermuda, she was invited to a reception and chose to walk rather than be driven. She became thirsty along the way and stopped at a house, where she asked a black woman named Mrs. McCarthy for a glass of water. Owing to the scarcity of water, the woman had to go some distance to obtain it, but was reluctant because she had to finish her ironing. When Louise offered to continue the ironing, the woman refused, adding that she was in a great hurry to finish so that she could go and see Princess Louise. Realizing that she had not been recognized, Louise inquired whether McCarthy would recognize her again. When the woman said that she would have thought so, but was admittedly unsure, Louise replied, "Well, take a good look at me now, so you can be sure to know me tomorrow at St. George's." The princess clung to her privacy, and enjoyed not being recognized. Louise and her sisters had another disagreement after the death of the Queen's close friend, Jane Spencer, Baroness Churchill. Determined not to put her mother through more misery, Louise wanted the news to be broken to the Queen gradually. When this was not done, Louise voiced sharp criticism of Helena and Beatrice. 1 month later, on January 22, 1901, Queen Victoria died at Osborne House on the Isle of Wight. In her will, the Queen bequeathed Kent House, on the Osborne estate, to Louise as a country residence, and gave Osborne Cottage to Louise's youngest sister, Beatrice. Louise and Beatrice were now neighbours both at Kensington Palace and Osborne. Upon Queen Victoria's death, Louise entered the social circle of her brother, the new King Edward VII, with whom she had much in common, including smoking. She had an obsession with physical fitness, and if she was sneered at for this, she would retort by saying, "Never mind, I'll outlive you all." Meanwhile, Louise's husband, 9th Duke of Argyll since 1900, took his seat in the House of Lords. The Colonial Secretary, Joseph Chamberlain, offered him the office of Governor-General of Australia that year, but the offer was declined. Louise continued her sculpture, and in 1902, designed a memorial to the colonial soldiers who died in the Boer War. In the same year, she began a nude study of a married woman suggested by the English painter Sir William Blake Richmond. Louise spent much of her time at Kent House, and she frequently visited Scotland with her husband. Financial pressures did not disappear when Lorne became Duke, and Louise avoided inviting the king to Inverary, Argyll's ancestral home, because the couple were economizing. When Queen Victoria had visited the house before Lorne became Duke of Argyll, there were 70 servants and 74 dogs. By the time of Edward VII's accession, there were 4 servants and 2 dogs. The Duke of Argyll's health continued to deteriorate. He became increasingly senile, and Louise nursed him devotedly from 1911. In these years Louise and her husband were closer than they had been before. In spring 1914 Louise stayed at Kensington Palace while her husband remained on the Isle of Wight. He developed bronchial problems followed by double pneumonia. Louise was summoned on April 28, 1914, and he died on 2nd of May. Following his death, Louise had a nervous breakdown and suffered from intense loneliness, writing to a friend shortly afterwards, "My loneliness without the Duke is quite terrible. I wonder what he does now." Louise spent her last years at Kensington Palace, occupying rooms next to her sister Princess Beatrice. She made occasional public appearances with the royal family, such as at the cenotaph at Whitehall on November 11, 1925. However, her health deteriorated. In 1935, she greeted her nephew, King George V, and his wife, Queen Mary, at Kensington Town Hall during their Silver Jubilee celebrations, and was made an honorary freeman of the Borough of Kensington. Her last public appearance occurred in 1937, at the Home Arts and Industries exhibition. Between these occasions, her great-nephew, King Edward VIII, abdicated on December 11, 1936. In December 1936, Louise wrote to the British Prime Minister, Stanley Baldwin, sympathizing with him about the crisis. Following the accession of Edward's brother King George VI, she became too ill to move around, and was confined to Kensington Palace. Affectionately called the Ante-Palace by Princess Elizabeth and Princess Margaret. She developed neuritis in her arm, inflammation of the nerves between the ribs, fainting fits, and sciatica. Louise occupied herself by drafting prayers, one of which was sent to Neville Chamberlain, reading "Guide our ministers of state and all who are in authority over us." Princess Louise died at Kensington Palace on the morning of December 3, 1939 at the age of 91, wearing the wedding veil she had worn almost 70 years earlier. Following a simple funeral, owing to the war, her remains were cremated at Golders Green Crematorium on December 8, 1939. Her ashes were quietly placed in the Royal Vault at St George's Chapel on December 12, 1939, with many members of the British royal family and Argyll family present. Her ashes were moved to the Royal Burial Ground, Frogmore near Windsor, on March 13, 1940. Louise's will stated that if she died in Scotland she should be buried at the Campbell Mausoleum in Kilmun next to her husband, if in England, at Frogmore near her parents. Her coffin was borne by 8 NCOs of her own regiment, the Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders. Her estate was probated as £239,260, 18 shillings and sixpence, with her debts including 15 shillings for cigarettes. Thanks for watching HerStory channel. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe our channel.